If you've got a choice of diff ratio for your racing car, which should you choose? If you talk to people in the paddock, they quite often say, well, you know, the 4.4 diff, that's the best, that's the one you want to use. But why is that? Why is that the best? Is there a reason for that? What goes into determining what diff is better than another diff? And ultimately, can you go quicker? Changing a diff is not, I mean, it's not like that difficult, but it's not a pleasant job. So you certainly don't want to change a diff and make yourself go slower. But if you can change it and make yourself go quicker, then surely that's got to be worth having. But how can you work it out? And what is the, is there an answer? Well, this video is going to take you through very simply in a kind of no maths or minimum maths way to explain that yes, there is a way you can get a good answer, and hopefully that will help you. This is something I've used myself to determine different diffs on different tracks, particularly over the years. So maybe that will be something you're thinking about doing. So you follow along. The idea is to give you the concepts, and then I'm going to point you at the end towards the calculator, the spreadsheet thing that I've done. But really, it's just to understand the main concepts so that you can think about this for yourself and really understand, well, what is it that makes one diff more appropriate than another? Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so this is a two-step process with the assumption that the only thing that we're going to change is the diff. And so we just want to know, right, if I change the diff, can I go quicker? And that's it. So the first thing to do is to choose a diff to get you to your maximum speed for your racing car, and I'll show you a way in which you can work that out. Then the next thing is to consider the refinements and such like, of which there are numerous. But I'm going to focus today on determining your best diff for VMAX and refinements for track. And particularly when I talk about tracks, I'm talking about the top speed that you're likely to achieve in your racing car on a track. So you've got some tracks with short straights, and you're never going to get to your maximum speed, like your maximum potential speed of the racing car. So, would it make sense to put a shorter diff in? And if so, which one? Okay, so that's what we're going to do, and so I'm going to take you through the base stuff, and then we'll get on to the refinement bits. So you can get a really good answer to which diff to choose with just this information. Now, it is potentially, it's engineering, isn't it? So the more you look into it, the more and more detail you can add. But this will get you going. And so if you've got your gear ratios, clearly your final drive or your diff ratio, or in our case we're going to be looking maybe at 2 or 3 different options for diff ratios, the engine torque curve, some tyre information, and some drag information, because that's the main resistive force that your vehicle sees, and it's basically what determines, combined with your engine, how fast you can actually go. You also need a calculator. You can, I'll put a link down the bottom. You can go and grab that from the website. I'm not going to go into too much detail of all the maths today. I just want to focus really on the concepts. So, and the idea really of the calculator is you really just put in this base information, and it spits the answers out for you anyway. So we're going to keep it at that high level. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off with a chart, a graph. Now there is no maths in all this, but there are some concepts, and the concepts I'm going to explain with this chart. So we're going to see this chart a lot in the next few slides. So I'm just going to talk you through each bit, and we're going to build it up layer on layer, so you get a real comfortable feeling for what this is about and why it's important. So on the bottom, you've got speed, and I'm going to do all the maths in kilometers an hour. On the y-axis on the other side, you've got force in newtons. And what we're talking about really here is tractive force, which is the amount of force that your racing car can exert at the wheel, at the contact patch of the wheel, to drive you forward. And so the more force you've got, the faster you're going to be. Okay, so we get that. So what you can do is work out this a limit, and the tractive force has a limit, and you can see that here. So what you do is you take the power that your engine can produce, the maximum power it can produce, and divide that by the speed, and it gives you this lovely curve, and this effectively provides a limit or a frontier or a target for what your racing car is actually capable of doing. So if you could run at maximum power, run your engine at maximum power all through this speed range, that is the amount of force that your engine would be putting out at the wheels. Hopefully it's a fundamental concept to get your head round. So just to say that again, so you've got the wheel, contact patch at the bottom, and the engine is turning the wheel, and that's providing a force that's pushing you forward. As you go faster, in terms of as the car gets up to speed, the amount of force that the engine can produce reduces, and you can see that in this nice curve. What this curve is really showing you is the absolute maximum that your racing car could generate in terms of force if it could run at maximum power all the time. Now, if you've ever seen a torque curve, you'll see it kind of goes up and peaks and such like. So you'll be aware that it's unlikely that in a normal kind of internal combustion engine racing car that you're going to be at peak power all the time. But if you were at peak power all the time, this is the kind of acceleration curve, or this is the kind of force, that your racing car would be able to generate at all that speed. So why can't you just go on forever? Well, there's these resistive forces. Now you get some resistive forces in terms of mechanical stuff, and you get some resistive forces in terms of aerodynamics, drag. As you go faster, the drag is significantly more of a resistive force than the mechanical stuff. So you can see here, this line takes you up, and so as you get faster, the resistive forces increase, and so that is just purely down to drag. So if you make your car more aerodynamic and with lower drag, this whole curve will come down, and if you make it less aerodynamic with more drag, this whole curve will come up. The important thing here is where those two lines intersect. I'm sort of pointing on the screen, but I'd probably be better to do that. That defines Vmax, or the maximum speed that your racing car can go. It's totally independent of your gearing. And when I first figured this out, it was like, that can't be that simple, but it is. So that's as fast as your car can go. And if you think about it, if I add more power, that whole tractive force curve is going to go up, because I'm going to be able to generate more force at the contact patch. Yeah, so that will make me go quicker, which makes sense. And if I reduce my drag, that whole line will come down, the resistive forces, because I've got less drag, so that will make me go quicker as well, because that point will move along the line. So hopefully you can kind of see intuitively that kind of makes sense. The other thing to think about is you have this, the lower end of the scale, the slower speeds, you have quite a lot of tractive force in this example here, a lot of force that your engine can potentially put out. Now, in a racing car, or in a normal car even, you'll be familiar with that in terms of wheel spin. So if you mash the throttle or drop the clutch, you're gonna spin the wheels, and that's because the force that the engine is generating at the contact patch is more than the grip of the tyre. Now there are lots of different ways of working this kind of limit out. So, but in this case, I've done a fairly simple version, and you can see this line here at 5,000 or just below 5,000, and that's saying anything more than 5,000 newtons of tractive force at the contact patch, and we'll have wheel spin. Okay, so just to think about that again. So you've got the wheel engines turning, and then you're going to get a loss of grip. But that 5,000 meter line is just that. It's just that threshold before you lose grip. Okay, so in this case we can get just to nearly 5,000 newtons with no wheel spin at all, which means we can really start moving forward. We can't use all of the engine power, but we can use a fair bit of it. Okay, so these three lines define everything that we need to do in terms of gearing, and certainly everything we need to know about in terms of doing this diff analysis. Okay, so this little area here that I've highlighted is the acceleration potential of your car. So you can see at slower speeds you have much more acceleration potential, much more thrust available. And then as you go faster and faster and faster, your ability to accelerate reduces to a point where you get to your maximum speed and you can't go any quicker. So if I introduce a gear now, I'm going to take third gear. So you can see third gear on the chart. So this is the force that the engine can generate in third gear at these different speeds. And so as you'll be familiar, this is a torque curve, and it kind of goes up and drops away. So at lower speeds or lower RPM, it hasn't got a lot of power, and then as the RPM increases, it gets much more power, and then it sort of falls away again. So that's why you kind of get this curve going around. And you can also see, right, so it's sort of labouring a lot. So if you imagine starting off from 0 in third gear, it's really slow. So, and that's what you're seeing in this chart. It's not rising very quickly, and the curve is fairly shallow going round. But as you get up to speed here, you're much closer to this threshold. So the area between the largely aerodynamic resistant force and the force in third gear, that area under there that I've shaded in, that's the acceleration that you feel when you're in the car. So if you're accelerating, let's say from 0 in third, and it's sort of quite slow, and you can see that that's quite a slow, quite a narrow band there in terms of acceleration. Then we're kind of getting up to speed. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, now we're moving, and then it sort of falls away again. When you in your head, you'd normally be changing up to fourth or something like that. Yeah, so you can see that what we're trying to do in this chart is make sense of what you feel in terms of some curves and some numbers. So the interesting thing is that all this area here that I've shaded in is lost force, you might call it. Because that curve is quite shallow and quite low, all that area that we've defined originally as being our sort of super potential from the engine is kind of lost. We're only taking part of it. We're only taking this bit, right? So what we actually want is all this other stuff here that I've shaded in sort of part hatching and part coloured in is missing. Yeah, so that's lost. That's lost potential that we are not getting from our engine. And so you think, well, that's going to be slow, basically. So if I add another gear, so this is now why you have more than one gear, right? So I'm now going to add a second gear, and a second gear, and it is second gear. And so you can if you can see now, you've got a second gear, but that's much earlier in the speed range, and it's much higher as a result. And so you can generate, so I'm generating much more force at a lower speed. So really I want to be in second gear in these lower speeds, sort of this 50 or whatever kilometers an hour. because it's going to generate a lot more force than in third gear. Hopefully you can see that. Okay. You also have a lot less loss in terms of this potential. So if you coloured in the area, so that little area that I've coloured in and a little bit, and then the hatch bit, that it's still a loss compared to what you could have, but it's a lot less with these 2 gears than just having that third gear. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. So we're trying to get as much of this area as possible, but we can't run our engine at maximum power all the time, so we have to use gears. And what the gearing looks like is this. Okay, so you've got these 2 gears here, and in this case we've got 2 gears, and there's a bit of, there's still a loss there, but there's less loss than there was with 1 gear. And you can imagine, right, okay, now we're going to add 3, 4, 5, 6 gears. And you can see if we can spread those out along the curve, we start to have a much less loss all the way along. Okay, so let's just make sure that's a really fundamental thing. So what we're trying to do is get these curves as close to the potential, that tractive threshold potential line, as possible. And that really is the whole aim of gearing optimization. Okay, and if you can work out the little area of those little curves, which is what we're going to do in a bit, then you can actually quantify it and say, well, okay, this is better than that because the area there is much closer. Right. So now I've added in 5 gears, and you can see we've got, let's see if I can get a mouse going on here. Right, so we've got, there's first gear, second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear. Okay. We've got a tractive limit, we'll annotate it a bit more this time. We've got the tractive force, we've got the resistive forces, put in the Vmax there, so you can see, like, okay, the Vmax of this is 176 kilometers an hour, which is around here. What I've also done is, because the calculator calculates when you should change gear, because it's at these intersections, so I've also added in these sections here. So the change, you should change from first to second at 69 kilometers an hour, from second to third at 105, from third to fourth at 143, well, and from fourth to fifth at 180 kilometers an hour. But as the maximum speed is 176, we're never going to use fifth gear. Okay, so that's actually quite interesting to know as well, whether or not in this, you might think, oh, I should be in fifth gear because I've got 5 gears. Well, actually this is saying don't do that. Okay, so that's a slight aside, but there's a lot of information here. I'm just focusing on the diffs, but just to flag that, you might be interested as well. So the area, if we take that area loss from before, that concept of that 34, so the area loss here now with these 5 gears is a much less. You can see it's just these little areas here. There is a bit here that's lost as well at the beginning, but typically what you actually do is you slip the clutch here, and you'd sort of rev the engine and slip the clutch. So in actual fact, in this kind of zone, you can sort of play around with the low end. So it's not something I'm focusing on in this spreadsheet, because you can slip the clutch and rev higher and do some other stuff. This is for when you actually, clutch is fully engaged and your foot's, to the floor. How do we minimize the losses then? So I'm looking at these red areas here, okay, and they're the ones that I'm going to try and minimize. And so you can see, right, I want to get that as close as I can to the line. Okay. So what you can do is, with a bit of maths, is add up the area of these funny shapes, and I've worked it out to be about 8,078 square newtons, okay, or newtons squared, whatever. It's because it's an area and it's newtons, right? So that has given us now a number. That's saying, right, okay, well, that's 8,000 and a bit. If we can choose a diff, that gives us a number that's less than 8,000 from our diff options, then we'll use that, because that's going to give us a lot less losses, much closer to the overall potential of the vehicle, of the racing car. So we're going to try and choose a diff that gives us the lowest number here, and it really is that simple once you've sort of worked it all out. So this diff is for a 3.9 diff, and what I've also done here, just to make this, I've got 3 slides here which I'm going to cycle through so you can sort of see how it looks. But what I've also done is I've kind of manually drawn a line here, and that line there is what this gearbox and this diff are able to produce in terms of acceleration forces and in terms of forces. Okay, so you've got the dotted line being the potential if you could run at maximum power all the time, which you can't because you've got your torque curve. So this is showing you the potential given the gearing of what you could, the maximum force you could generate all the way around here. Okay, and so just keep an eye on that red line, because I've done it 3 times for 3 different diffs, and you can see 3 different things here. Okay, so but remember, the actual objective is just to make this number smaller. So if we can get a diff that gives us a smaller number than that 8,000, then we're doing all right. So common diffs are 394144s. That's like, so this is a reader asked me about this particularly, so I've chosen those diffs for this reason. But you know, there's all sorts of diff ratios that are going to be relevant to you. But I've chosen those 3 just to compare. Okay. So let's have a look. So that's 3.9. So 4.1. Can you see? So it's a kind of toggle between these 2. So what's happening? The 4.1's a shorter diff, so it's bringing all the gear ratios up. They all get shorter. Okay. And you can see that the little red line here is a slightly different shape. If you squint a bit, it might help a bit. You can also see that those lines have all moved down. So it's now recommending that. Gone the other too far, but you get the idea. It's now recommending that from first to second was 69 kilometers an hour, and now it's 66. Okay, so it's saying, well, we should be changing a bit sooner than before in terms of speed. Because we're not changing the gear ratios themselves, the actual RPM doesn't change, but in terms of the speed will, because we've got different diff. And what that means is now, when we look at our 5th gear, it's suddenly looking like actually 172 kilometers an hour, which is only 4 away from our Vmax. But in theory, it's better to be in 5th gear than to stay in 4th. Okay, I mean, you might argue, well, I'm not going to bother changing gear at that point. But just so you know, theoretically, if you could change gear seamlessly, then it would be better to be in 5th gear at above 172 now with the 4.1 diff. You can also see that this is 6,430, which is a lot less than 8,000. So it's like this 4.1 diff is already better than the 3.9 diff. All right. So you saw a minute ago, I jumped ahead, but there's the 4.4 diff is better again. Everything's sort of moved along, so we've got even shorter. These areas, I haven't done such a good job on the outlining it, but the calculated areas of these little areas here are 4,765, which is less than 64,000 or 6,430, whatever. So basically what this is saying is the 4.4 diff is the best, but we've got a real reason for it, because this 4,000 square newtons, 4,000 whatever, is much less than the 6,000, and it's much less than the 8,000. Okay, so hopefully you can see now we've got a objective way of determining whether or not which diff to run. Okay, so that gets us the basics, the base setup. Now refinements, there are loads of them. I'm only going to look at the track, and specifically the track top speed. Okay, so you can't get to Vmax or your maximum speed of your racing car on every track. So the question is, if I'm on effectively a shorter track or whatever, or a track with shorter straights, is it better to run a different diff than the standard one which we've just worked out there? And the answer is kind of depends really, because you're all the time you're just trying to make that area again really small. So the idea is that you're changing your diff up and down, but also the target endpoint is changing as well. So now rather than being here this Vmax, that Vmax kind of pulls in, that kind of comes less, which also affects the area as well, because we're not going quite as far to Vmax. So what you need to work out is this 4,765 again, but you just needed to do it for a different speed, which will be a lower speed. So I'm just going to take you through that. So this is a lovely looking chart. So I thought I'd put it on here. It's a bit overwhelming, to be honest with you, but I'll just take you through it and show you what it can do. Because again, it's got loads of stuff going on, but I'll just keep it fairly simple. So what we have here is the losses on the left, up on the right, and then the diff ratios along the bottom, and then each line curve is for a different target top speed. Okay, so our Vmax is 179.1. Okay, and then each other line is sort of 10 kilometre an hour increments slower. So say for example, the top speed you could get to is 160 versus 100. You couldn't get to Vmax, but you could get to 160. You'd look on this chart and go, okay, well, where's the 160 line? And then you'd look here for the lowest amount of losses, and this is the totals from before, right? So it's the lowest amount of losses on this chart, and you should have picked the right one. So if you were looking at Vmax, it's come out of 4. So what I've actually done for this second bit, for this refinement, I've actually changed the ratios in the model for the car compared to the first part of this video, just because it makes it a better story to show you. So in this particular car, we've got a new car, it's a different gearbox, and we're now looking at, okay, well, can we, the Vmax is 179.1, and with these gears, in this case, the best gear ratio is a 4.0. Okay? Now, it might not be that you have 4.0, but it's saying that would be the best if you did have it. Okay? The next thing is, if you look at this is the sort of the other end of the scale. So you've got like if this would be a really short track or slow track. So this is 110 kilometers an hour would be the maximum speed that you would get to. And what it's saying here for track maximum speed is that the best diff would be a 4.3. It's not actually that much different. And in fact, you can sort of see, well, intuitively you might think, and this is the reason I did this set of gears, because intuitively you might think, well, I just want to go shorter and shorter and shorter with my diff, because I'm going slower and slower and slower, but it doesn't quite work like that, because of what you're actually trying to do is minimise that area, and the gear that you're in has an impact. Yeah, so you remember those things sliding up and down. That actually has quite a big deal. So it's kind of like a non-linear problem, as you can see, which is why these are curves. So the actual answer is like the best diff is really the 4.3. Now that's not something you may have intuitively thought of for a circuit that was that slow on its top speed, but this will give you the most force. This 4.3 diff will give you the most force, and you'll be the quickest with a 4.3 diff given this set versus a 4.4, 4.5, 4.6. Can you see? Because they're going up and the losses are more. Right? It's a bit complicated, that chart. So what I've done is simplified it a bit. So just taking the maximum. So this is our Vmax. So from before, so that's 179.1, which is a 4, which is the best diff. And then you can say, okay, right. So for each speed, for each of these speeds going down, which is the best diff? I've just basically worked out the minimum for you. So you can just read along and say, okay, 160, yes, 4.1, 140, yeah, 4.3. Interestingly, 130, so slower, is 4.1, and again, and that you can see because of those lines, or whichever way it works on the telly, is because of the gears. So you're into another gear at that point, and so what it's trying to do is just always trying to minimise those losses all the time. So you're trying to you're sort of shuffling up and down the curve with the diff, so that you're always minimising the losses for your target top speed. Now that's the optimum, as it were. But if you haven't got those, if you've only got a choice of 3, like my reader, he's got 3, 9, 4, 1 and 4, 4, then what should you do? So then I've done this, so it just takes the best one from your option list. So it works out the best overall, and then it says what's the best option for you to run. So interestingly, it's saying here that for top speed I should be in a 3.9. For the 140 it should be a 4.4. 150 4.1. So it's sort of, that's kind of, it's picking the right one. And what it's also doing is it's saying, well, the 4.1's better than the 4.4, better than 4.2. Looking at that chart and just trying to pick the closest one of your options that will give you the lowest losses. All right. So it's a little bit complicated, to be honest with you. The outcome's really simple. It's just like put the 4.1 in, or put the 3.9 in, or whatever. But at least you've got this way an objective reasoning for it. You know, why is it that? Well, you know, now that you know. Okay, just to quickly recap on what we've done. So we've gone from a situation where we're picking a diff based on intuition and paddock gossip, and perhaps without really knowing whether or not we've got the right one. We've worked through a way of optimizing the diff based on some maths. So we've looked at what are the gearing, what's the gearing actually doing? So in this case, we're looking at the potential of our racing car to accelerate, and then where we're using the gearing to get us as close to that potential as possible. And the idea of being able to choose one diff over another diff is to be able to say, well, if I can get the area of the losses smaller, then that's the right diff to use. And we've also looked at how those areas change, because as the diff changes, all the gear curves move up and down. As the target top speed changes, those areas also change. So you have a different situation where you can maybe optimize a bit more or a bit less. You can generate a nice definitive table like that by saying, okay, I've got an option of a 3.9. It's all very well saying, you know, I need to have a diff of whatever ratio. I haven't got that. You can say, well, I've got a diff of 3.9, 4.1 and a 4.4. So what should I really use? And then you could generate a table like this where it says, well, for VMAX it's a 3.9, but for 170 kilometers an hour, if that's as fast as you're likely to get on your track, a 4.1's the way to go. If 140 kilometers an hour is the most you're likely to see, the 4.4 is looking like a better option than either the 3.9 or the 4.1. And some of this stuff is a little bit counterintuitive. So the reason why the maths helps us is that we don't really have to think about it once the maths is done, and you can just plug your numbers in, decide, right, the likely top speed of the track that I'm going to is 160, boom, 4.1, and fit that, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. So hopefully that is useful in giving you the concepts. Yeah, by all means, grab the spreadsheet from the website, linked there, yourdatadriven.com. Subscribe to the channel, and wishing you all the very best of luck with your diff selection and with your racing in general.